welcome back, everybody, to the ROI Online Podcast. And today we're interviewing someone that you need to meet. His name is Laurent Notin. I'm pronouncing it the best way a Texan can pronounce a French-based name, right? So Laurent is in Helsinki, Finland. He works with business leaders and he helps them build outstanding businesses. Laurent, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Hey, hi, Steve. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. So Laurent interviewed me on his podcast a while back, and I enjoyed the conversation so much. I thought we need to do a little reciprocity. And so here's Laurent, and I wanted him to spend a little time with the folks that listen. The folks that listen, Laurent, they're business leaders as well. And the cool thing about this podcast is that, we learned that we're all wrestling with similar things. And then we're all going through business the best way we can, trying to make decisions. And yet when we learn that others are working on similar problems, we figure out we're just not crazy. We're normal. And so that's the cool thing. And that's what you do with your clients.
Yes, correct. By the way, well done on the family name pronunciation.
Oh, thank you. Well, when a Texan sees Notin, they say Notin, right?
Yes, of course.
And then
they're not French,
right? And then here's the thing on Laurent's last name: he has a T. And what do we need the T if we're not going to say it, right?
Yeah, this is French. Don't ask me. That's French. It's full of examples like that.
So Laurent, you have an interesting backstory. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your kind of start why you ended up in Laos, and then your journey there and your experience working with companies on marketing and research and that part of the world, which is very interesting to me. I'm curious at what the difference is, and we'll get into that later. But yeah,
all right.
Let's set up your backstory.
Okay, so I landed in Laos on the 3rd of October 1999. I still remember when the plane door opened, and suddenly I was like, wow, this is so hot. There are mosquitoes flying around me everywhere. There was no road, there was nothing, but it was amazing. And I moved to Laos because I followed my ex-partner, who's the mother of my kids. And initially we moved there for 9 months only. I didn't have any job. I just finished school. So I was like, okay, let's go there. And, we stayed 7 years, and I moved back to Europe like last year. So in a total 20 years in Southeast Asia.
Wow. I didn't know this, but Laos has this giant forest or wilderness that's almost hardly touched, and they have all these amazing animals and wildlife. I know very little about Laos, even though I have a couple of folks that work for me that their families originated there.
Yes, it's a fantastic country. So it's a landlocked country. It's in between, Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam. No access to the sea. It's called the land of the 1,000 elephants. There used to be like a lot of elephants, land slang in Laotian, the elephant. But of course, with time, and people, the number of elephants have decreased. But still, this is one of the countries in the world where you can still find elephants living in the wilderness. And when I went there, like I told you, there was no roads, there was nothing. I started working for this small market research agency, and we had just such a great time. It was amazing because it was completely different from what we knew in Europe. But, we were young, we were like 23 at that time, and we had a great life. We didn't need a lot of money. My partner, she enjoyed her job. I enjoyed my job too. We met at the same time we became friends with people who arrived at the same time. So young people like us.
Hmm.
We had a blast. I recommend anyone to go to Laos and visit this country. It's really worth seeing it.
So when you went there, you started living. What did you learn about yourself that you didn't know?
Back between so many things,
Mm,
I don't know where to start. First, I think what I learned was that I was able to live in another country, and it was okay to go a little bit wild,
hmm.
you know.
To go
I
wild.
re- yeah, like I remember like the first thing we did when we knew we were moving to Laos. We went to see the Pasteur Institute in France because we looked about things about the mosquitoes and malaria, and we bought like I think we bought something like 1,000 euros of medicine
Hmm.
and for malaria, and we read all these books about don't go on your own the evening close to the Mekong River because there are a lot of mosquitoes. Don't put ice into your
Drinks.
drinks, etc., etc. Well, the first thing we did on the first evening is we went to the river because people who welcomed us, they brought us there, and we had a lemon juice with ice next
Uh-huh.
to the river around 5 p.m. was full of mosquitoes, and we were fighting. And then another thing I would say is I learned patience because I spent 20 years in underdeveloping countries, and time has a different meaning over there. Things don't go the way you're expecting them to go here in Europe. In Laos, they have an expression called Bopenya. So Bopenya means it's okay, don't worry, but it's really the attitude of the people. They take their time. They are not in a rush, and they don't understand why you are in a rush. You, the white people, and it's pretty much like, why should I do something today when I can do it tomorrow? While here in Europe, it's more like the opposite.
Should have done it yesterday, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that gives you a lot of this ability to take a step back and look at things uh, completely differently, and realize that what you have in Europe or in the US, it's not that bad actually.
So in my mind, I'm wondering, what kind of market research did you go to Laos, they don't have roads,
Yeah.
at least in the area that you were. Why do they need marketing? What kind of research, right?
Yes. Well, when we arrived in a capital city, they were building the roads like with asphalt, and in 6 months' time, there were roads everywhere. But still, it's a small country. But the thing is, people do consume, and big brands like Unilever is huge in Southeast Asia. Well, they need to understand the market needs. They need to sometimes they launch products. They need to test their products. They need to understand how people feel, what people do, etc. So they needed market research, and there was one research agency, and I ended up working for them. It was a small team, like 10, 12 people, and it was very interesting because it was all pen and paper, questionnaire. So we had this team of interviewers, and we will send them out in a field, and they will fill in with a pen on a hard copy questionnaire. We get the questionnaires back, and we will do all the data entry, or we will actually send data entry to Cambodia for another research agency for which we did a lot of uh, sub projects.
Hmm.
And you have, there's a lot of issues because 80% of the population live in rural areas, but they still are, they are customers for these brands.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to reach out to them. So there's a lot of issues in terms of logistics. You have sometimes you have the interviewers, they need to travel hours before they can reach a village. And then they will say in the village, they will do like maybe 5 interviews, and then they will come back and they will go to this other village. And so that's what makes it also very interesting.
That's fascinating to me.
Mm.
So you lived in Cambodia, you lived in Vietnam a little
Yes.
bit. And so you talk about being an expert on Southeast Asia. Talk
Mm.
about the differences in the marketing mindset in those countries. What did you learn? What was contrasting, but what was the same?
Mm. So I already mentioned about time. That has a big, difference between Europe or the US and Southeast Asia. There's also Southeast Asia. The people there, they are very family oriented. For example, so the young people would take care of the old generation, and they would all live together.
Hmm.
That is changing. That has changed while I was there. And you start, especially in Vietnam or even in Thailand, you start seeing in the big city, you start seeing like young couples living by their own. But most of the population, they all live together. So that is one implication that has implication for marketers. Another one is it's very male oriented countries. The women, very difficult for them to have a voice, very difficult for them to have a career. So they really need to fight, even more than here. Another thing is that status is really important, like the status in the society, because all these societies are based on a pyramid of hierarchy. So it's the same in personal life, and it's the same in professional life. The person at the top, who is usually the elder person, has respect by default from the other members of the family of the company, and that person makes all the decision. So the higher you are in the pyramid, the higher the social status is. But also social status, you will demonstrate it. It's very important to show off. And it varies, across Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos to different degrees. But it's very, cars, for example, are the big symbol of social status. In Cambodia, there are hundreds of SUVs everywhere. It's amazing. But that is because it's a social status symbol. Jewelries, all these external signs of wealth are very important. I've visited houses where there is nothing. They don't even have beds. But in the garage, they have the latest SUV. So, they don't really care about what's inside. They really care about what's outside. And you can see it, how they clean their cars. They spend their time in Cambodia, especially, they spend their time cleaning the cars. And I've often made the reflection, like, I'm pretty sure, these men spend more time cleaning their car than they spend with their wives. you know, there's also a lot of arranged weddings still. And I wanted to say something else. I forgot. Sorry,
So we have
but maybe it will come back.
the status symbols and how important it is to convey where you are in that hierarchy. Arranged marriages. Yeah.
Well, sorry, I forgot. It will come back. It will come back to me.
Back, yeah. So when you're considering them, I'm curious how the companies arrange their marketing to
Yes.
convey respect or to convey how their product might complement whatever the status. in their hierarchy was.
Uh, the, so that is the thing, is that a lot of companies, when they were doing advertising, they were focusing on this social status symbol. Beer, let's take beer, for example. So stout beer is seen as a symbol of power, very mainly. It is expensive. So in the advertisement, beer companies will play with that. But that's the only thing they would do. But then they would do the same with banking. They will do the same. They will do the same with every type of products. And at the end of the day, you see all the same advertisings everywhere, and they're all addressing the same population, the elite, those with the money, and they forget about everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But some companies, they have understood that you need to go beyond that. And I'm going to take the example of Unilever again, because they were really, really good at marketing. Unilever developed products for the rural market. Let's take shampoo, for example. The people living in rural areas, they cannot afford this big bottle of shampoo that you can find in big cities. So what they did is that they developed small sachet, one-time usage, and that they would easily deliver in the villages to small mom and pop shops, and it's easy for them to resupply, and everybody can have access to that because it's cheap. So people living in rural areas can wash their hands with the same type of shampoo than the people living in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that with beer, it's the same. Some beer in developing countries is in particular, you can see them everywhere. Like in Laos, there is Beer Lao. This is the big brand of Laos, Beer Lao. You could see Beer Lao in absolutely every location in Laos. There was no road, there was no electricity, but there was Beer Lao.
Mm.
Because first, and that is the other thing I wanted to mention, there's this big sense of pride for local products. Although there is a mistrust about the local products, because local people don't think that the local products are as good as the international products, especially, for example, Japanese products, like for the cars or for the motorbikes, they're very well perceived.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the local products, when they have this trust from the local population, they're doing super well, like the beer Laos in Laos. And so the beer company like Unilever, what also they did is that they developed this network of wholesaler and sub-wholesaler, and so that they can reach absolutely everywhere in the countries, in the remote areas.
Fascinating.
Mm.
So now you're back in Helsinki,
Mm-hmm.
and wherever we go, we change, we transform, we learn things, and when we come back, we bring
Yes.
some lessons back to
Yes.
where we are and apply them, and that makes what you have to offer special,
Mm-hmm.
unique. What are some of the things that insights? It's in his story, it's called the hero comes back with the gold after they go through their journey, and they learn this thing, and it's called the gold, and that's when they return back to where the whole journey started. What's some of the gold that you brought back?
I think one is what I mentioned before, is that capacity to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and not be overwhelmed as fast as other people can be.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen so many issues. I faced so many challenges. Like every day you would go to work and you would not know what will happen. and there is always something going on. And, you know, be it, I don't know, an electricity cut, no internet, someone has an accident. It's all the time that it gives you that ability to relax in front of adversity, because otherwise you can't get through it. You know, the way also people are less educated than we here in Europe or in the US. So you have to deal with those people on a daily basis. And sometimes it can be very difficult because you would tend to micromanage or do the things for them, because at the end of the day, you will end up like, oh, you know what, I'm going to do it myself because it's going to be faster, it's going to be better. But that is not the right way to go. This is true everywhere, but it's even more true over there. Because of that lack of education, it's very tempting to think they are incompetent. But they're not incompetent. It's always the same, like everywhere in every business is you need to hire the right people. Once you have the right people, well, you need to train them. So they leave, when they leave your company, they leave with better skills than when they arrived. It's exactly the same over there, except that the business environment and the constraints are different. So you need to adapt. That is something also I learned. That is something also I'm able to teach or mentor my clients with. I think also I was lucky because I always worked for entrepreneurs. Like, I mean, real entrepreneurs. Like the kind of entrepreneurs where they give you the key of the company and they say, go, you know, because I'm busy doing something else. I got other projects. By the way, I don't have a lot of money. So, you know, just go and manage the business for me because I trust you. They trusted me because they did not really have the choice. Like my first job in Laos, after 2 years of being a project manager, they gave me the keys like that because they were like, well, we want to go to Cambodia. We have you to run the business. So, you know, we're going to try you, but we don't really trust you. And it turned out that I really enjoyed managing a company. So you get to have responsibilities and big responsibilities faster, I think, that if you were living in or working in Europe. And because I was managing companies for those small companies and I was able to make them grow, I learned a lot about running a business. I had to learn financial management. I had to learn leadership, and I failed a lot. I had to learn how to, you know, processes, how to run processes in a smooth manner in companies, and all of that I was able to bring back with me here, and I can teach or provide advice to my clients.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's like training in an environment, maybe in sand, or if you're training in an adverse environment. Now, when you return back to Europe, you would assume that those obstacles or barriers or the resistance to certain things would be less, but it's not necessarily true. There are different adversities.
Yes.
But to take that same mindset. Is that where you started to fall in love with CrossFit? Did you get into some kickboxing or anything in that area that's very popular?
No, that's an interesting story because it has really shaped who I am, CrossFit. So I started CrossFit 6 years ago, more or less. And after I came back from Vietnam, I resigned from the market research company I was working for, and that was like 14 years of market research. I resigned and I did a burnout because there was a lot of challenges when I was in Vietnam. It didn't go very, very well. and I did a burnout, like a real burnout. And I would work for this new company, this advertising agency, where I did have shares, but I would go to work, but I would not be there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could physically see myself moving, but I could not feel it. I'm not sure if you know what I mean.
No,
And
it's
then
you felt awful. That must have been.
yes,
You feel like a failure. You feel like there's this point where I've been in a few situations where I never wanted to say this, but you get to that point where you struggle to just say it, but I hate my job. That that's like giving up, or to me it was like this real awful
yeah,
confession to find myself in that position. That's where you
yeah.
were.
That's why I resigned from the market research company, and that's why I moved into a new industry, into a new company where I had shares into the advertising. But I resigned, yeah, because yeah, I couldn't stand it anymore. There was a lot of things that happened, and I don't want to expand too
Hmm.
much on that. But I was in that
Space.
very weird space of not feeling very well. But I was back to Cambodia, where I had my family, my kids. I was working for new industry. It was super interesting because the business was small and there was a lot of things to do. But I was not there. And I remember at that time I was playing a little bit of football, and I was fed up too about football. It was like everything at once. And I talked to this guy. I remember his name is David, and he used to be in the rugby team of the under 21 in England. So like the guy was fit, he was big, and he told me during lunch that he started CrossFit. And I'm like, oh, CrossFit, what is that? And he said, well, explain to me a little bit. And he said, well, you should try, because they just opened a box in town, and every Saturday morning there is this free trial. Just go and try. So I went there immediately, and man, I was hooked, like just like that. When you had this feeling where you discover something and you're like, wow, this is what I was looking for all my life.
Hmm.
That was it. I immediately felt in love with the sport. And that sport has completely changed me. Again, because I had several changes. I was, for example, physically, I'm soon 44. In 3 weeks, I will be 44. I have never been in such a shape. I'm every year I'm in better, I'm fitter, which is amazing. But today I'm 44. I'm like, whoa, what, I'm going to be 50. What is it that I can do?
Yeah.
And that feeling of being fit, and every day being able to use that fitness into your everyday life, being able to think better, being able to sleep better. I don't want to lose that ever. So that has transformed me. I was fat when I started CrossFit. Now I still have a little bit of fat, but less. So I had to change my diet. I had to change my diet too. And CrossFit has also brought me one thing, which is discipline. I've always been someone quite disciplined until I was not anymore. So I've always been going like discipline, 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 and bam, down. But CrossFit, I have to be disciplined, because it is so demanding that if I want to be better, if I want to continue being able to do pull-ups and handstand push-ups and whatever crazy things we're doing at CrossFit, I have to get that discipline of taking care of myself. But it is so rewarding. So I'm trying also to bring that to my coaching, to my with my clients. We're talking about discipline,
Yeah.
and discipline start with yourself.
Let's talk about that. Now,
Mm.
you return to Helsinki. Obviously, you have a very successful business, coaching, training, teaching. How does that discipline, how do you work that in to an entrepreneur that's used to being in charge, doing making all the decisions. And so they're going to be a little bit of
Mhm.
resistant to someone that's coming in and telling them what they should do. How do you do that, coach?
Well, the first thing is that I don't work with people who don't want to change. When my clients need my help, they want my help.
Hmm.
They are in a phase where they're like, okay, there's something that I need to change or I need to improve, and they are ready to accept external help.
So
If you
here's,
the thing,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt. Right here is like the biggest secret to running a good business and picking good customers. Repeat that again. First of all, I don't.
What did I say? I don't.
You don't work. You don't work
I,
with people.
I don't work with people who don't want to change. I don't work
There
with
you
people
go.
who don't
There
want to
you
be
go.
coached. Yes,
That's
yes.
that's huge. That's a great statement.
Oh, but when I started my business become a business coach, I decided that I would pick my clients, and that has given me an amazing freedom. Because before I never did that exercise of going after the ideal clients to a certain point, but not to the point where I brought it now with my business. And that gives, like I said, gives a lot of freedom. So I don't want to work with people who don't want to work with me. I don't want to work with people who are ask me at the end of the day, hey, can you give me a discount? Because no, that's not what I want to do anymore. I've done that for 20 years, you know. And for the first thing with coaching is that if you want to change, if you want to change, yeah, if you need to be ready to change. If you're ready to change or if you're ready to improve, if you're telling me, okay, I am going to commit, maybe, on a scale 0, 100%, I'm going to commit at 80%. If there is an obstacle in front of me, I'll go through it with your help. That I would, that is the first thing for coaching. When it comes to discipline, it's a lot about building routines, I would say. And those routines, they are up to you. I can't teach you or train you on, I can tell you what a routine is, but you have to build your own routines. I don't know which routines will work for you. I know which routines work for me. Like, for example, in the morning, I take my time. That is my routine, taking my time. I wake up, I go, I make the coffee, I sit on the couch, sipping my coffee while watching the news, and I prepare myself for the day. That is my routine. And it takes like 1.5 hours just because that's it.
Hmm.
But other people, they want to go into work like immediately. Some people prefer to work later on the evening. But what is important is to build routine, to get into the discipline of having those habits until they become a routine, and you don't have to worry about them anymore because they are just part of who you are. The most difficult is to start that first step. It's easy. Deciding to change is easy. Just a snap of fingers. Say, okay, today I'm going to change. Right. But then you need to make that first step, that first physical step to start the change. What is it? Whatever it is. If you want to lose weight, maybe you can start by stopping, reducing the number of soda you drink. But you have to physically do that. And then
Right.
you realize that once you've done it one time, the second time is easier. And the third time is easier. But you need to keep on going and going and going and, whipping yourself a little bit, maybe getting a coach to help you be accountable for yourself until it becomes a routine.
Why is that hard? Why is the first thing to start so hard?
Because that's that's a great question. Have you seen these comics where you see this speaker talking to a crowd of people, And the first question he asks is, who wants to change? And everybody raised the hand, you know. And then the second question is, okay, who is going to lead the change? And everybody's gone. I think that's it. It's because I think change sometimes means suffering, and suffering is not, your brain is not made for that. Your brain doesn't want you to suffer. You know, it's look at how easy, for example, it is to blame someone, and how difficult it is to give a compliment to someone.
Mm-hmm.
I find that very, very interesting. But I think it's the same. It's the same with change. We're like, oh yeah, it's not that difficult to, you know, stop quitting cigarettes. But actually, it is very difficult to quit cigarettes because of what the cigarettes has inside. I guess it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same. Kind of the same phenomenon here.
So let's talk about the clients that are your best clients. Obviously, they want to change, but describe who your perfect client is and how they transform after working with you.
So I wouldn't say that change maybe is not the right verb. It's more like they hit a plateau,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking to get to the next phase of growth,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow they have difficulties to do it. So yeah, on the way they may have to change some of the things, starting with them.
And they're looking for that. They're at this point where they've
Yes.
done an evaluation. They realize they can't take it, or they could probably do better if they engage someone to help them think a little bit different or approach it different. Correct?
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
they're achievers by nature.
Yes, because they want their business to do good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a lot of people said it's my baby, but
Right.
that's what it is. They
Yes.
want the business to do good, but they also want to make sure that they provide a job to the people they employ. Because most of these entrepreneurs I work with, they care about others a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They care because they know that people are their best assets. They don't do that for the money. So that's another element. I work with entrepreneurs first, the business owner. In terms of size, my dear client, they are around I would say the 1 million threshold, like 20 or minus 20 or plus 20% around it. And usually, like you said, they are ready to accept external help. And they spend a lot of their time stuck into operations. Like here, so much so that they can't see anything anymore. So I come and I help them, you know, take a step back and look at more of an holistic view of their business. And we talk a lot about strategy, for example. And we talk a lot about how they need to stop being the main bottleneck of their business, because that's what it comes down to. They are being the main bottleneck of their business.
Mm-hmm. That's a common theme I hear often.
Mm.
I'm glad I don't have that problem running my
Mm.
business, but I'm being facetious. But um, it's
Yeah, you know, I have a client is in Vietnam. He's been running his companies for 15 years.
mhm.
That is the problem he has.
But
So
it's
it can
hard,
happen all the time.
right? But it's hard to admit
Yeah.
it's hard to admit your baby is ugly. It is my baby, and isn't he cute or isn't she cute? Uh,
Mm.
but you can see where the bottleneck is. How do you
Mm.
get someone to get over that, get past it?
Usually we talk about strategy a lot. We start with I love Simon Sinek. I've read this book, Start with Why. So that's what we do. We start with why. This is such an interesting exercise to do. Most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the answer, or they have some sort of an answer, but that answer as they have diverted from their initial why, and their business has become something else.
Yeah, that's a great point
That's,
to
mm,
help them revisit the original reason because maybe they've forgotten, maybe they've got distracted, maybe.
mm,
Yeah. You see that in love
mm.
stories too, where the couple's kind of over each other and then someone comes along and helps them remember why they got together. That's
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Yes, except I'm not a life coach. But yes, it's very similar. But at the same time, when you work on that, if you uh, spend a bit of time of thinking about it, you may discover new things about your business, which also will give them this extra boost, because when they reach a point also when they are not motivated anymore, they have lost the passion, they have lost that extra something that they used to have, because they are facing that wall and have difficulties to get past it.
So in Helsinki or in that area of the world, are there a lot of connections with Southeast Asia?
Not too much. Finland is a small country. So I've only been here for less than a year, but what I see is that there's a lot of connection with China.
Hmm.
And I guess it is true everywhere in Europe, because China is that big, huge, gigantic country where all the supplies come from. But behind China, you have what we call ASEAN.
Hmm.
ASEAN is 650 million people. It's a huge market too. There's a lot of um, factories also producing stuff, like in Vietnam, Indonesia, Myanmar, Cambodia. Before the current situation, there was a lot of garment factories there, but they are hidden by this big country, China. So the first step from Europe to Asia goes to China.
But so you're uniquely positioned because this event, here we are sitting in our sheltered in place because of everyone's had to remain distant from everyone because of this event that originated in China. And
Mm.
a lot of countries have realized their supply chain is at risk. If China has another blip, we've had several events come out of China, the
Hmm.
SARS and other. So it would make sense that many companies are starting to reconsider where they should relocate their supply chains. And you're perfectly positioned to help them um, with those new conversations with many other potential um, new relationships.
Yes, that is one of my hopes, especially because also at the same time there's more news about Vietnam. Positive news about how Vietnam has handled the COVID-19 situation with very few cases. I think no disease or very limited number of disease. And you see those news starting popping up on social media, on LinkedIn. So that also should attract more attention from Europe. Plus, China also is becoming more and more expensive.
Mhm.
So when you are a company, you need to look at your cost, and the other countries offer cheaper alternatives with high, sometimes high skilled people. Because in Cambodia, for example, yes, people are not educated. Well, their education level is low, but they can be high skill. I mean, if you give them technical skills, they can be really, really, really good. You train them properly, and they can do that very, very well. What I think also is going to happen is that more and more companies are going to look. Companies, yes, are going to look at local in their own country production. Coming back to the roots, I see that in Finland. There's people are pushing a lot for local made products, not only vegetables but meat and all the other products like There's a lot of Finland is very known for all these innovative design products.
So what's your temperature as far as the future of the economy in Finland?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What is your temperature? How do you
Hmm.
feel about the future of the economy in Finland?
Hmm. It's an interesting place. I think from what I can see so far, and again, it's less than a year of experience here, is that people are well off in general. The economy is doing very well, I think, and I don't think I don't see that this is gonna change. Yes, there will be some aftermath with the COVID-19 situation, but things will get back to normal. I believe because the government also is helping a lot. At the same time, they have this huge startup um, industry, especially in the gaming sector. Many games that come from Finland, and so there is this willingness to move things forward. All these young people with no money because they all start up with this passion to build something. It's everywhere. I've seen that. You can't miss it. So I think I'm in a good country. Uh, I think the economy will continue doing well. The thing is, although Finland is very limited by the size of its population, it's 5.5 million people. The density is very high. You have I think something like 1 million people living in Helsinki, and then you may have like 5 or 6 big cities, and then it's scattered all around the country. So the market remains quite small. So what Finnish companies do is that they start looking at Nordic countries around them, but step by step, they will, I think, go. They will have to go a little bit beyond. They are very Finnish people. From what I see, they're very. They keep things inside them. They're very difficult to approach at the first time. Very cautious,
Hmm.
But once they know you, they're very nice. They're very nice people, and I think in their businesses they do a bit the same. Very cautious. So they will go to where they see where they have things they are familiar with, like these Nordic areas, and then going beyond that it's a little bit cold over there. But I think they will get there.
Well, excellent. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Lauren, and
Cool.
so if there's some folks that are listening to this podcast and they're
Yes.
wondering maybe what opportunities might be available for them, either in Finland or your connections with uh, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, how can they
Mm.
contact you? How should they reach out?
Okay, so they can reach out on my website, www.laurentnotin.com, and go to contact me. Otherwise, I'm also reachable by email, contact@laurentnotin.com. And also have on my website, I also have my telephone number that is available if you want. You can WhatsApp me.
Hmm.
And you can also listen to my podcast, which is
Yeah,
called Interviews, where I talk to other entrepreneurs. It's an episode every week for the moment.
awesome. And they can find that on Apple.
Everywhere. Yes, Apple, Spotify, TuneIns, iHeart Radio, and my website too.
All right, excellent. Hey, Lauren, I appreciate you and value and thank you for being on the ROI Online Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right, and that's a wrap.